On a Pale Horse by Piers Anthony. So this is a fantasy novel, and if you have followed this channel, you will know that I don't always have the best success when it comes to fantasy. Some of it I have responded to quite positively, but on the whole, the fantasy genre is not really my favorite. But I wanted to give this a try because I had heard some things about this book and about its author more particularly. So I wanted to give this book a try because it had a kick-ass cover and the title is really cool. So I just wanted to see what it was like. Now, this says that it is the first book in the Incarnations of Immortality series. But despite that, this is in fact a standalone book. As I'm given to understand it, the series which this book inaugurates is like just a collection of stories that link and connect, but which don't really tie into each other in an overarching story. So you can read this just as a standalone. And so that generated some pretty goodwill in me because that's one of my biggest complaints about the modern fantasy genre is that it's so geared around just endless series of book after book after book. But anyway, so I picked this book up and I read it, and it was an interesting experience. It really was. I have a lot positive to say about this book and also a lot negative to say. So, On a Pale Horse is the story of Zane, and I don't really think we ever get his last name in this book. But anyway, in a fit of depression, he has decided to take his own life, but as he's just about to, he sees the Grim Reaper approaching him, and he reflexively shoots the Grim Reaper and kills Death. And then he is informed that he has to assume the office. It's very similar in concept to that old Tim Allen movie, The Santa Claus, where you kill Santa, then you have to become Santa. It's very similar to that. So whoever kills the Reaper has to become the Reaper. So Zane now finds himself thrust into the role of the Grim Reaper, and he also learns that the Grim Reaper is but one of the 5 incarnations of immortality, the other 4 being war, nature, time, and fate, and that they uphold the offices of, I guess, the forces which govern the world. And so Zane has to set about collecting souls as Death would be expected to, and dispatching them either to heaven or hell. Now, this book takes place in a very interesting setting because this this was written in the 1980s and it appears to take place in a roughly contemporaneous time, but it's set in an alternate world, an alternate Earth, where magic and technology coexist alongside each other. So it's very humorous as well. This is very much in the vein of Terry Pratchett. It's very whimsical and silly at times, and I really admire that about it. Actually, I really enjoyed that aspect of it because, since George R. R. Martin, there's kind of that tendency in fantasy to lean towards the grim dark, to just be blood and breasts and, just kind of be exploitative in some respects. And this book definitely did have the breasts in it, but it's not gory or hyper dark or anything. It's actually, like I said, kind of whimsical. And the setting of the book, like heaven and hell and God and Satan, are like open, acknowledged entities, and like the souls that Death has to collect are not all the people that die, because hundreds of thousands of people die every second, but rather that it's the souls of people that are perfectly in balance between the dark and the light, between good and evil, that he has to thereby, you know, kind of discern where exactly they have to go, because, like I said, heaven and hell are just openly acknowledged locations in this, and God and Satan are in a war for the souls of mankind. But it's very whimsically done, and they're like Satan has like a PR campaign to try to like tempt people to come to hell. It's like, the weather's warm. Come on down. It's very funny, and I like that. But anyway, so as Zane sets about fulfilling the role of death, he finds himself caught up in something of a conspiracy involving the life of a young woman named Luna, who he eventually kind of falls for, and who it is revealed will eventually, at some point in the future, oppose Satan and his forces on Earth. And I think, like, avert World War III or something like that. And so Zane has to save her, and kind of the Reaper has to actually prevent death instead of bring it about. But that's pretty much the premise of this. I liked the premise, and by the way, this book the plot moves at a mile a minute. It really does. It's very fast paced. It hurls a lot of stuff at you, but it's pretty deft in its handling of it. It keeps you on your toes, but it somehow it kind of flows well enough, at least. So I like that. Now let's talk about the meat and potatoes of the work, the writing and the characters. The writing in On a Pale Horse was not great, although I think it could have been. Piers Anthony is not a bad writer, and he has a commendable vocabulary. There were words in this book which you don't see very often, and especially not in a book of this type. And I really kind of respected that. He has a pretty good vocabulary, pretty expansive, and I'll always admire that. He threw in some $10 words, but not in a pretentious way, in a way that felt organic and natural. So I like that, but oh my word, the exclamation marks in this book. So if you don't know, uh, when you're just writing narration, it's okay in dialogue to use exclamation marks, but when you're just writing narration, maybe there are some instances where it's acceptable to use an exclamation mark, but very sparingly. But Piers Anthony put more exclamation marks in this book than I've ever read anywhere else. It's absurd how many exclamation marks are in this, and the writing is not always the finest, but it's not necessarily bad, but it's definitely not great. So it's kind of just somewhere in the middle. The characters in this weren't great either, but much like the writing, neither were they terrible. Zane and Luna, his love interest, both have burdens of guilt on their souls, which makes their souls actually be like almost perfectly in balance between going to heaven or hell upon dying. And they both have kind of sordid pasts. Zane killed his mother, not like just cold bloodedly murdered her, but she was like dying and languishing in a hospital, and so he mercy killed his mother, which he feels a lot of guilt for. And then Luna had to do some gnarly things with black magic to help her father. And the romance in this, it was actually better than I thought it would be, especially given the way that this book handles romance and sex, which I'm going to get to that. But honestly, it kind of had me interested. It really did, because even though this book approaches topics such as sex and romance in a very unique way, not the best way. But despite that, the romance between Zane and Luna was actually kind of touching. It's two people that are burdened with a lot of guilt and are dragging around a lot of baggage, that are kind of coming to confide in each other and lean on each other a little bit. And I really liked that. It's not insta love by any means, and they don't just immediately jump in bed together, which I liked. It's a very kind of slow burn, build up kind of thing, and it's based more around uh, confidence between two people, and kind of leaning on someone who can help support you in your time of need. And it's sweet kind of, and I like romance in books when it's sweet and not just carnal. So it was good enough. Again, not great by any means, but I liked it. But let's talk about what this book does, because this book is not just a fantasy novel. Oh no, Piers Anthony would have you know that this book is serious social criticism. He mentions that in the afterword to this book that he considers this a vehicle for some serious social commentary. And even on the back of the book here, it says, "This is a novel that will long linger in the reader's mind." Uh, I guess maybe if you've never contemplated your own mortality at all. And this is another thing that I both liked and didn't like about the book. I really admire the fact that it did try to have a point, to have a message to it, to have depth and subtext and be more than just a story. I really admired that because you don't always get that, or it has not been my experience that you always get that in the realm of fantasy, but this book really did try to do something, to say some things, which I'll always respect. It's just the nature of those things, which I can't really get behind all the way because I'd heard so much about Piers Anthony as an author. Because, whenever I'm reading a book, especially for the purposes of a review, I kind of like to, look into it, especially like on Goodreads, and see what the common consensus seems to be. And if you go and look up this book on Goodreads, you will see that there are a lot of the reviewers that call this book out for its sexism and the way it treats female characters, and that Piers Anthony is kind of a closeted pervert, putting forward his own sordid views through this book. And I agree with all of that. This book is decidedly sexist, and the way it treats its female characters is not particularly elegant. However, it's not, or at least it didn't come across that way to me, as being something malicious, but rather kind of immature. This book really does read like the product of a grown man who still has like a 12-year-old's mindset when it comes to sex and women. The women in this book get naked like that. There is not a single female character in here who is not introduced with very extravagant physical description of the hips and bosoms. And he uses the word bosom so freaking much in this book. And that she had an ample bosom, but not too ample. You kind of get the feeling that Piers Anthony has a type when it comes to women of rather, shapely in the hips and well fleshed in the thighs, and with an ample bosom, but not too ample, and of a certain age range as well, and kind of on the younger side in the age range. And it's very immature. It's very puerile in the way that it treats women, but I don't think it's done out of malice or a genuine misogyny, but rather a man who kind of still has a little boy's mindset when it comes to these matters. But yes, it's so kind of exploitative with the female body. There's lots of lurid descriptions of asses and thighs and breasts, but despite that, there's actually precious little actual sex in the book, which again, I actually like that because it wasn't gratuitous, at least not explicitly so. So again, yet another aspect where it's kind of a mixed bag. But yes, this is a very juvenile book when it comes to matters of sex and romance. I can definitely understand a lot of people not liking this because of it. But the fact that it does have things to say earned it some points in my estimation, like I said. But the things that it says are kind of they're pretty controversial. Mainly, this is just an exploration of like assisted suicide and the right to die. You know, like Jack Kevorkian, that kind of thing. And I like that. That's fine. That's definitely an important topic that is worthy of debate and discussion, and I respect that. But then he also goes off on some tangents about like sex laws, but prohibiting relations between children, consenting children and adults, like statutory rape laws. But again, I kind of just respect it for having substance at all, even if I don't agree with it. But yeah, so On a Pale Horse, to rate this book, I'm going to give On a Pale Horse a C plus. It's not great by any means, but it's definitely interesting, and it does kind of get you invested, if only to see what kind of wild ass thing he's going to put forward next. But I really appreciated the whimsy of this. It's very lighthearted, but it's for the most part lighthearted, and it actually managed to make me laugh at certain points. There's kind of some wordplay in here, and again, the fact that like there were billboards for hell that's like, come on down, the weather is always warm. It's just that kind of thing. It made me laugh. It didn't take itself too seriously, but it was serious enough when it needed to be. The pacing is blistering in this. It's not a particularly long book. It's like 303 pages, I think. So, and it moves, like I said, at a mile a minute. But it was a very okay book. The writing is not great, but neither is it terrible. The characters have some depth to them, but it's more telling than showing. So again, it's kind of just in the middle. But the humor of it and the silliness of it, the kind of Terry Pratchett quality to it, I really admired. And the fact that it does have things to say, um, I like, even though what the book says, I can see a lot of people having issues with, and especially the way the book handles women and women's bodies is very puerile, and it's just kind of just cringy a little bit. But overall, I actually did enjoy this book. It's not the greatest thing I've ever read by any means, but it's not the worst. It's far from the worst. And am I going to just be rushing out to buy the other books in this series? Probably not. But this book was overall a pretty positive experience for me reading it. So yeah, a good C plus is what I'll give On a Pale Horse. It's a very okay to sort of good book. So, On a Pale Horse by Piers Anthony. Have you read On a Pale Horse? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything that I've said about it here today. And if you have not read On a Pale Horse, I could recommend reading this, as long as you know what you're getting going into it, which I hope I have provided that. This is not a masterpiece. This is not the deepest thing, unless you've just never pondered death at all. It's still kind of shallow, but it does attempt to say some things, but it's not really the most eloquent thing, or the most mature thing, definitely. But if you're in the mood for something fast paced, definitely fast paced and fun, with a little food for thought, I could recommend this. It is kind of enjoyable, or it was for me. So, as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.